Hi folks, I'm gonna try to connect some dots about what Grainchek is, what the pod is, what the portal to traditional mobility is behind me, that production space that I'm walking through right now. The goal is that Grainchek, it's a mobile app for tracking my time today. All day long, I'm tracking my time, and that generates a feed of events for the day. And then I can share that feed with others. It turns out really neat. So that's Grainchek. The pod, I don't know if we can, yeah, you can see it back there. The pod and the space that I'm walking through right now, that'll eventually be a production space. This might be a little more confusing. The stepping stone that kind of connects everything is the goal. How do we go from nothing, just raw woods, it's amazing, to something? And so each step along the way, whether it's shelter, like the pod is maybe a minimum viable shelter. What's necessary for shelter within the variables given for this particular piece of property, or what we'll call starting as nothing. Then electricity. I had an interesting conversation last week with the local electrical supply company about how to get poles for the transmission lines to get electricity to the property, going from no electricity with the availability though at the street to having electricity available on the property. What does it take to go from nothing to something? So there's the pod, from nothing, and actually I was able to, in this case, use a simple camping tent to get started, and then as the weather got more serious, move to the pod. From nothing to something. Each step, carefully analyzing, documenting what does it take, what's necessary, the thought process. The goal would be to be able to parachute into a challenging environment and go from nothing to something with something of a strategy. And Grainchek is a way at this point to document that process. But eventually, it'll also be a stepping stone to the exciting stuff, the autonomous mobility. How do we go from nothing to something to now, let's make a production space based on autonomous connected mobility. How does that shape that conversation of electricity, or the portal to traditional mobility, or the driveway? How does a community that's based on autonomous connected mobility have that conversation about traditional infrastructure like electricity, shipping and receiving mobility solutions, traditional stuff? How do we connect to it? How do we maximize benefits of autonomous mobility in a way that a carpenter like myself and a local mechanic can build and operate this, rather than MIT teams or something like that. So that's the goal. That's the connection between Grainchek, the pod, the snowy environment that we're parachuted into, and the portal to traditional mobility here. It's an exercise. We'll see what we learn. It's been a lot of fun so far. It's super exciting.